Perhaps the super chain is too Ethereum aligned and too focused on security and not focused enough on performance.
Is it important to just continuously, strive for more and more validators, therefore more and more decentralized, therefore more and more secure?
There's two main reasons why you would want to use Blobs over, say, AltDA.
Are you a big Balaji fan of network states?
Welcome back to The Rollup, your home for technical talks and open conversations that shape the modular future. Nothing on today's show is to be construed as financial advice. You can see our full disclosures list at therollup.co/ventures. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode after a quick word from some of our awesome partners.
Redstone is DeFi's modular oracle, supporting over 100 clients on over 50 chains and offering 1,000 assets. Redstone is the leader for Bitcoin staking and yield-bearing assets. They offer the most robust, customizable price feeds available in any model. Join the Redstone exhibition today.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to The Rollup. Today's episode, we have Mark Tyneway of Optimism Superchain and many more roles, Chief of Objective Decentralization Metrics and other Ethereum progression metrics here today. I had a really good conversation with Mark in Bangkok, I think at the Ethereum Interop Forum for like 2 hours or so. And this is kind of like a follow-up conversation from that. So Mark, thanks for joining us today and welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Andy. And excited to follow up on our conversation. In Bangkok, we're at the Ethereum Interop Forum. Everyone keeps complaining that Ethereum is too fragmented, and we're trying to combat this by unifying Ethereum. So the Ethereum Interop Forum is this basically a tiger team to push interop standards across all L2s so that we can have a unified user experience across all Ethereum.
Yep. And Mark, a lot of times it's easier for people to, continuously shout the problems. Ethereum's too slow. Ethereum's too expensive. Ethereum's fragmented. The L2s are parasitic. And it's more difficult to think about the solutions and come to some objective measurements, how we can bring some of the people working on these things together, and ultimately achieve some of these solutions. So how have you found the solutions amongst all of these problems? How have you been able to identify that? And then ultimately, what do you think is the path to reaching those solutions?
Yeah, I think that one major problem is everyone is speaking past each other right now. Everybody is demanding for decentralization, which I get it, right? We're trying to build a new internet that, fixes a lot of the problems in the current internet. And we're trying to, build solutions that don't trap users. We're trying to bring power and give power back to users. But I think that optimizing for decentralization, that is the wrong goal. People might think that's absolutely insane to say. They're going to be like, oh, what a sellout. This person's compromising on the crypto ideals. But I don't think that's true at all. I think that if the goal is decentralization, then we are making a subjective goal. And if we're trying to coordinate a group of people towards a subjective goal, you're just going to have a bad time. Everyone is going to have a different opinion of what decentralization is, and it's going to be really difficult to get everyone to move in the same direction. This is why, as an industry, we need to stop optimizing for decentralization, and we need to break decentralization down into objective, quantifiable, and achievable goals and accomplish those one by one. And in doing so, we can get everything that we want out of decentralization much faster and more effectively.
Yeah, and so I think that right now we oftentimes use things like L2 Beach or things like these, like analytics platforms to effectively help us kind of coalesce around like ideas of decentralization. And I think most notably are these stage one, stage two type of rollups. But like, I honestly think that the rollups today are kind of not even like close to what the end state is. And so we're trying to optimize for decentralization and these types of ideas when, like, frankly, I don't even think the performance and the execution capabilities and the applications that are built on these stacks are, like, even close to where they really need to be. So, like, are we optimizing for decentralization at the wrong time? Or are we thinking, or like, should our efforts go to more towards building higher performant rollups? Or, like, what is your view on the focus points for scaling Ethereum as we have it today?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of a scary topic because you never know when you will need the security. You really only learn when it's too late. With Ethereum, for example, some people question, oh, we're overpaying for security. But you don't really know the exact point at which you're paying the appropriate amount until there's some sort of attack. So there's one world where, um, we start decreasing security a bunch and we focus on user experience things, increasing throughput, and we're fine. And we're able to scale. Then there's another world where, you know, there ends up being an attack and it's catastrophic. And given the roll up centered roadmap, all the different teams have a choice. And I would imagine over a long enough time frame, there probably will be some rollouts that, make a decision to compromise on security too much and end up paying for it.
Mark, could you break down, and decentralization oftentimes kind of becomes synonymous with security. Um, could you break down decentralization into some of its subcomponents? Maybe especially some more of its objective subcomponents so that we can start to coalesce around those as north stars?
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's talk about with rollups. One point that is well studied with the decentralization of rollups is L2 beats stages. So, like stage zero, stage one, and stage two. And um, L2 beat has objective measures that say and define the properties of the system that require it to be stage one or stage two. And the problem is, so Balaji, he tried to define um, decentralization like years ago. And I believe he calls it the Nakamoto coefficient, where basically his definition is, you have to look at all the pieces of the system. There's lots of pieces. And then you have to kind of, the system is only as decentralized as the least decentralized component. So the problem with talking about decentralization as this concept is oftentimes there's parts of the system that are not being considered in that particular conversation. And one person might be considering different things in their definition, and another person might be saying something else. So I think some ways to make decentralization more specific are around censorship resistance, um, upgradability, liveness. These properties are all things that can be measured and quantified and contribute to decentralization in some way, and but are scoped in a way that's quantifiable.
Yeah, I think that is what LTBD is trying to do, but it keeps bringing me back to this point that, like, the rollups today are just so, uh, like, we're just barely scratching the surface on what's possible that I'm not, like, I'm not sure that even in its final form, any of the rollups on the super chain right now are even close to what our end state of scaling is gonna be. And so, like, we are I just sometimes feel that we're just tripping over ourselves instead of just maxing out throughput, maxing out performance, and just trying to actually build something that, like, can compete with, like, something of the Solana, of the Hyperliquid, of that kinda caliber. And so, you know, the rollups on Superchain are, I would say, very Ethereum aligned, like, as much Ethereum aligned as possible, um, to to the extent that you guys basically, uh, have some sort of, requirement or like, recommendation that all the rollups should use blobs, or that they should, and they will, and you could probably kind of, like, fill me in there. Um but I'm not seeing how we're gonna get to a world of maximally performant rollups using blobs on the super chain. Like, we're gonna be stuck with, like, lower TPS chains, tripping over ourselves on decentralization when there's gonna be other chains out there that care less, use AltDA or juice their sequencer with some sort of, like, co-location mechanisms and, um, basically run circles around rollups that are stage 2 that are, like, screaming about their decentralization. And so your point is kinda like, well, you don't really know the cost of security until you need it, and that's true. Um, but I'm not even sure this conversation really is that important until we actually just maximize what's in front of us. Um, so I don't know, maybe you can fill in some holes in that thinking there, but, uh like, perhaps the super chain is too Ethereum aligned and too focused on security and not focused enough on performance. But, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great points. I think that if we look at the data today, you know, a majority of the L2 transactions are happening on the super chain. And this shows that there is some degree of product market fit for, this EVM L2 in blob space. So, people want that product. Um, to my knowledge, there is not major usage of any rollup that is using AltDA on Ethereum. I do know that if you look at Conduit's website, there are some L3s that do use AltDA that are very popular. I think that that's like a different sort of product than, say, like an L2 like rollup. So um, I think it really depends on the application and what their needs are when it comes to these. But I personally am very bullish on scaling Ethereum. I believe that we will be able to have massive blob throughput and we will be able to scale the L2 product just as much as any of these alt DAs while not compromising on these levels of security that you would expect from Ethereum.
Yeah. And I think I think the data supports that. Um, there's still, I just looked up DeFi Llamas, 54% of all TVL across every blockchain is still on Ethereum. The slow, expensive L1 Ethereum. And so I think the market prioritizes safety more than some of these other metrics that are available on rollups. Um, and so to double click on the blobs perspective, because we have had a lot of conversations with DA providers, and there's a scale, there's a vision of scale that is really grand and has a lot of bandwidth. And so, of course, blobs are the Ethereum DA product. And why do you think, these rollups, not only on the super chain, but all rollups maybe are most incentivized to use blobs and end up using blobs? What is the use case? What is the bull case there?
Yeah. So there's two main reasons why you would want to use blobs over, say, AltDA. One is credible neutrality. If you want the least amount of governance in your system, the most credible neutral system, um, then you are going to not want to introduce another dependency. If you want, um, basically the problem is that adding another dependency to your system, they may be less credibly neutral than Ethereum, right? And when I say credible neutrality, what that means is equal opportunity of usage or non-discrimination of usage, right? So every time that you add a new component to your system with a new governance model, then you're going to impact the credible neutrality of the system, right? In rollups today, um, they have the governance system of Ethereum, and then they also have the governance system of their multi-sig that upgrades them, right? And as we move towards stage 2, that multi-sig will continue to be removed. Its ability to influence the system will be diminished over time, and it will be more and more credibly neutral, closer to what Ethereum is today, right? So the other reason why you would want to use blobs over AltDA is because it will impact the security of the system. So what is security? Security is safety and liveness. Safety is this idea that your funds will not magically disappear, or they won't be taken away from you without your consent. It's your property rights as a user. The other part is liveness. This basically means the chain will continue. You'll have the right to send a transaction, and you'll be able to continue to read, data from the chain to know that your assets are there, right? So adding an AltDA to your system adds another part of the system that can fail with regards to safety or with security. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Secure or safety is kind of an underpinning of that, along with liveness, um, which sounds great in practice. And I think that in reality, we're at a similar position. We're also like pushing up against that throughput threshold on blobs. 80%, 90% on Ethereum, I think, are filled, getting closer. Um, so like then what? We have Pectra coming up, right? So that's good. I think we double the blob limit, which should happen this year, which is going to be massive for scaling Ethereum's DA. Um, but once we get over that blob limit consistently, like I mean, I think we've seen just little tiny pieces of that. But I think like the market has kind of instantly or relatively quickly corrected back down as fees have gone up. Um, but do you feel that Ethereum and the kind of implementation speed of Pectra, as well as further upgrades to blobs, will be able to match the growing pace of the superchain of base of these other kind of high in demand chains?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, Ethereum is increasing its blob throughput in Pectra, like you said. This is really good because there's a bunch more chains coming online. There's Unichain coming online soon. There's Sonium coming online soon. There's Ink. Ink just came online. They're starting to rev up. All of these chains are part of the super chain, and I expect them to be going really hard this year onboarding new users and using blobs. So it is really important to increase the blob capacity of Ethereum. And Ethereum can only upgrade every so often. It's a lot of work to ship an upgrade to Ethereum. So there is a legitimate question if Ethereum can scale fast enough for all these chains to continue to grow. And I can't tell you exactly what will happen when push comes to shove. It kind of sounds like an Ethereum civil war almost. People are upset that it's not scaling fast enough. They're threatening to leave. It could cause a lot of drama. But in my opinion, we should focus on helping the core devs increase the throughput. I think that with Ethereum, we've made it this far. I think it would be a very bad look to leave Ethereum just because it's not shipping fast enough. To me, that feels a bit parasitic. What we should be doing is we should be helping out the L1 core developers more in making sure that they're able to ship the blob increases. And I know that there's a lot of good research going on with PureDIS, the next step towards dank sharding, which is kind of the holy grail of scalability of blobs for Ethereum. And so PureDIS, it's kind of like a baby step towards dank sharding. And people are really hopeful that it will be able to ship in Q4 of this year. And that should be able to increase the blob throughput. I think that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. With Pectra, we were able to increase the blob limit because we were able to identify optimizations and basically fix these problems that were wasting bandwidth so that it's safe to increase the blob limit. And when I say that, what I mean is we never want to upgrade Ethereum in a way where it massively increases the hardware requirements of running a validator. That would be really bad because it would result in instability of the network, because a bunch of validators would instantly go offline and no longer be able to participate. So every time that we push an update to Ethereum, we need to make sure that the validators have the appropriate hardware requirements. One major problem that the Ethereum community had was there was no definition of what the hardware requirements actually were. And everyone would argue about, oh, we want to make this change to Ethereum. And some people would say, oh, we can't do that because we need to keep the resource requirements low for validators. Recently, someone from the EF published the standard hardware requirements for a validator. This is amazing because now we have an objective measure that we can all coordinate around. And now we will no longer speak past each other. We can all point to the document and say, this $1,000 machine, this is the minimum hardware requirements for a validator. And every single network upgrade can be tested against that specific hardware. And as hardware improves, we can improve those standard hardware requirements, keep the costs the same, and, scale Ethereum.
And does that mean we ought to leapfrog up to like the most capacity that these hardware requirements can handle? Maybe there's some offline, the validators that would go offline, but now that we've defined that, can we kind of push that capacity as much as possible? And I have a follow-up question, but I think I'll pause there and then ask my follow-up.
Yeah, we definitely should. We should all, now that these are published, we should just make sure everyone's bought in on it. And then there are so many optimizations that can be made. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit, especially in the P2P layer. reducing bandwidth. It's like really important for validators to be able to communicate over the P2P network, their signatures and everything, and like gossiping the blobs. Um, so now that we have these hardware requirements, we can measure everything against them, and we can optimize for them specifically.
Awesome. And then the follow-up was a little bit more abstract, but would you say that there is a target number of validators that we ought to have online at any given time? Is there such a thing as too many? Should we is it important to just continuously, strive for more and more validators, therefore more and more decentralized, therefore more and more secure? Is that the right train of thought, or is there an optimum somewhere in the middle that, we can, as long as we have 10,000 validators, that's sufficient, and we can just, stick with that and then maximize performance as much as possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think with everything, there's trade-offs, and I'm sure that there's different prevailing philosophies on this. Some of the upgrades that Ethereum has been talking about, especially related to like single slot finality, has been around trying to reduce the number of validators that are, participating in consensus. Um, and then that would kind of allow for like this like faster finality. And um, this kind of comes back to what we were talking about before. It's unclear how much security is actually required until it's too late. So we don't want to dramatically reduce the number of validators, even though the consensus Ethereum would operate much more effectively if there were less validators, because it would use less overall resources. But everything's a trade-off. So I imagine that this conversation will continue into the future. And as we learn and experience new things, it'll evolve. But I definitely can't say that there's like one best path today.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's why we're suggesting incremental changes. We reduce the, excuse me, we raise the performance a bit, and we expect some validators to drop off, and we raise it again, some more validators drop off. But as we do so incrementally, we don't leave room for outages because we can kind of go on a test case basis, raise performance incrementally, and we shouldn't shock the system dramatically to the extent that we would drop below some critical mass of validators. Um, is that the idea?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and there's a lot of EIPs and research going on that I think can squeeze a lot of performance out of Ethereum. Um, I think this year is going to be a big focus on scaling L1. I'm hoping that we're able to, ship PureDIS, a blob increase, by the end of 2025. And then also people are really passionate about scaling the execution there. There's, EOF. Um, EOF is like an improvement to the EVM. And, some benchmarks have shown that smart contracts that are written using the EOF version of the EVM are sometimes 25% faster than contracts using the legacy style EVM. So really, that is also a scalability throughput to Ethereum, because now contracts are using less gas, meaning, more transactions can fit in a block.
And that's a change that impacts Ethereum wide, right? So I think maybe what some people fail to realize sometimes is that improvements to the L1, especially as we load up the L1 with transactions that originate on L2s, some of these performance increases, ultimately translate to L2s as well. And so increasing performance on the L1, you know, does indirectly benefit the L2s as well. How Given that, most of the TVL still exists on L1, how important do you think it is that we we focus on the L1 and we continue to prioritize users and execution on the L1?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to continue to focus on the L1. Um, everyone, a lot of people disagree about this because the whole roadmap of Ethereum is kind of like, oh, we're going to do the rollup centric roadmap and focus on rollups. But, you know, it's turned out to be much more difficult than we all thought to build a stage 2 plus rollup. Um, right now, a lot of people ask, oh, L2 should be focusing on these sorts of scalability improvements. But the reality is that we're trying to focus on getting to stage 2. And it's a lot of work to do that. And it's hard to make specific improvements to improve the scalability at the same time as trying to ship stage 2. So I think that once stage 2 is commoditized, then rollup teams will be able to have the bandwidth to take the reins on these sorts of scalability improvements and these EVM improvements. For now, stage 2 is just a higher priority.
My curveball is, if somebody made the argument that they think that Solana or Alt L1s in general helped Ethereum in the short term to help scale, uh, like just basically a single base layer for DeFi and kind of like NFTs and just overall usage, and that Celestia, Avail, or other kind of AltDA layers helped Ethereum in the immediate term scale by just offloading some of the extra throughput, but are long term competitive. Would you agree with that, or do you see it differently?
Imagine if the world's GDP moved on chain. Guys, say GM to SafeNet. The newest protocol by Safe isn't a blockchain and it's not a new layer 2. It's a transaction processing network built to send money anywhere and swap anything on thousands of layer 2s from a single universal balance in sub 500 milliseconds. It's fast, it's smooth, and it's simple. And it's built with safe multi-sig level security in mind. SafeNet unlocks smart accounts across multiple chains, allowing users to supercharge security, scalability, and speed. So get started today at net.safe.global and remember to follow @safe on X.
Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fraxtal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fraxtal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fraxtal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fraxtal mainnet. Bridge your tokens and bring your Frax assets into the Fraxtal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fraxtal. You are still early. Join today. Take part in our expedition into the singularity.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think everything is realistically competitive to some degree. There's a degree of competitiveness and a degree of cooperation. And at the most fundamental level, everything is competitive for attention. Everything from Netflix to YouTube, to video games, to crypto, right? People have limited attention. So whatever can fill your attention, that's where, companies are able to build products that are able to like capture value. And so if you think about it from the most fundamental level, everything is competing for your attention. And under that framing, L2s are definitely competing with Ethereum. But at the same time, there's a degree of cooperation with everything. So Ethereum and say Solana, they are both working together to um, onboard more people into the crypto ecosystem and spread overall awareness to crypto. And even though they're different base layers, they're different assets, they're still getting more people into the ecosystem. And the developers are building more tools that put cryptography in the hands of people. I think that is such an amazing thing, putting the cryptography in the hands of people, because now people can, custody value, and people can custody their identity, and there's no intermediary for in between you and these like core primitives that are required to be part of civilization, right? Like we have to remember that as the entire crypto ecosystem, we're in it together to, give power back to the people. So um, from that perspective, a lot of the crypto ecosystem is, working together to give power to people and, disintermediate and break down these walled gardens that are just extracting from us and upgrading capitalism.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, eh, with that lens in mind, a follow-up curveball is gonna be then, how do you think about, like, Elastic Chain, ZK Sync Stack, Ag Layer, Arbitrum Orbit, and Superchain? Like, you guys are all competing for the same deals, I imagine. Superchain clearly is getting a lot of the bigger deals, Unichain, Inc., Sony, some of these larger ones. ZK Sync, I think, just got, like, Deutsche Bank. I know Arbitrum's got a really good tech stack and has done some cool stuff. Aglayer's kind of been, like, in the middle, but I feel like Aglayer's kind of just now being like, "Alright, you guys fight it out. I'll connect all you guys." And this kinda gets into, like, this interrupt conversation, but maybe we can talk about how you look at these other, like, clusters, and then also just, like, how do we bring this together, within the super chain and within the super chain and these other clusters and just, like, broadly Ethereum scaling?
Yeah, that's a great point. There's all these different tech stacks, all these different teams that are all kind of competing for, the same deals, the same users. Obviously, I work at Optimism. I've been working on the OP stack for like over 4 years at this point. And I believe that the OP stack is the best tech stack for rollups today and into the future. And, we're continuing to add features. It's like extremely reliable. It's powering based, which is the chain with the most throughput right now, the L2 with the most throughput. Um, so we know that the OP stack is battle tested and hardened and high quality. Um, with all these other stocks, definitely rooting for them. Um, they're landing deals, they're launching chains, and yeah, I think in a world where the pie is not growing, then it's very zero sum because every ecosystem is fighting over the same set of deals and the same set of users. When the pie is growing, then it's a little bit easier because everyone can kind of specialize and land different deals and everyone's onboarding new people. So yeah, I think one of the good things about Ethereum is that it does have so many different teams working with it, and if one fails, then all of Ethereum doesn't fail. Another team can just take their spot and continue scaling Ethereum.
One thing on the, growing the pie, I've been having this thesis that, like, once we get to more of a chain abstracted experience for especially for new users, I just don't think the ideologies that we all have today are going to exist, and so, like, once a new user onto base equates to a potential new user onto, like, abstract chain when they go live, which equates to a potential new user on proof of play, because they just go from app to app and not, like, bridging and these types of things. to me, it becomes very clear that the pie is growing and that this kind of like infighting of fighting over the same pie and the same users isn't really going to be nearly as prevalent. So I see us snowballing towards this and am excited for it, but generally kind of agree with your takes. Rob, did you have something there?
Yeah, because, we were talking about blobs a little bit earlier in this conversation, and I think the most common way to think about interop is through these clusters that people tend to talk about. Superchain, Orbit, Elastic Chain, AgLayer are like, the more prominent ones. Is there and the answer might just be no, but I'm curious, is there any interop benefit of using similar DA? For instance, a roll-up on Superchain uses Blobs and a roll-up on Arbitrum Orbit uses Blobs. Do they have any shared interop capabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a whole giant design space here and how Interop works on between different tech stacks or within the same tech stack. And usually um, the term cluster is used when it's describing chains that have some sort of native lower level sort of integration of interoperability with them. And it's usually used to describe chains that are all using the same tech stack. And they form this cluster, and there's this cohesive user experience between these chains. Then there's like another sort of interop, which is happens more at the application layer. And this can happen between clusters or just between arbitrary chains. And there's trade-offs between these two designs. And there's giant trade-offs even within the designs. So let's talk about clusters a little bit. This is basically what I've spent the last year thinking about. We're building native interoperability into the OP stack. And the design is essentially a cluster where all of the chains can pass messages between each other at a lower latency than going through L1 and to the other L2. That is the fundamental problem that we're trying to solve with interop, is we don't want to have to use L1 as a hub. For an optimistic rollup, that's very slow. That is 7 days to withdraw. And then finally, your message will be sent to the other chain. For a ZK bridge, or like a ZK rollup, quick aside, there's no such thing as a ZK rollup or an optimistic rollup. It's really a ZK bridge or an optimistic bridge. But, we need to get everyone on board with that. The whole John Charb article around the bridges, not the rollup. Highly recommend you go read that. Everyone that's listening, please. Okay, so basically, interop solves the problem of not needing to go back to L1 before you go to the other L2. And when you're in a cluster, you can go between two chains that are in the cluster very, very quickly with less risk and some high degree of security. If you're doing that same action between two chains that are not within the same cluster, there's some sort of trade-off that you're making where somebody is taking on risk. And an example of how this can play out is, let's think about the user story of sending ETH from Arbitrum to OP mainnet, right? They're not in the same cluster. One way to quickly send ETH between Arbitrum and OP mainnet would basically use a intermediary that kind of is like a loan provider, right? So they can basically say, if you give me ETH on Arbitrum, I will give you ETH on OP mainly. And this works well, but it's constrained by liquidity. Because if everyone starts trying to bridge really quickly in one direction, then they will, the loan provider will run out of the ability to like give out more loans on the one side of the trade. And so this is like a liquidity constraint. Um, the problem with this is that the loan provider needs to rebalance their assets to ensure that there's like liquidity that can be used to facilitate these cross-chain transfers. And during that time, they're exposed to the risk of the bridges. Right? We all know that bridges can be hacked. They're one of the scariest things to work on in the blockchain space because, millions and millions of dollars have been hacked from bridges to date. And, so yeah, there's risk during that time period. Um, and basically with native Interop, we're trying to build something where that risk is taken away, where you don't need to worry about rebalancing. The interoperability is built directly into the protocol, and you don't need to, compromise on any security when you're sending the assets between chains within the same cluster.
Yeah. And so can we go so what you just described sounds a lot like an intent-based design. Is that more or less what you're describing?
100%.
Okay, so like the key native interrupt for Superchain is effectively gonna be around an intent-based design. That's what you've been doing a lot of research on?
Oh, I mean, in pen-based designs can easily plug into it.
Okay.
Um, but the idea with native interop in the OP stack is to provide low latency and high security
Yeah.
with the message passing. And then developers can use that core primitive to build any sort of application that they would like.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the thing that you guys got right early on, along with just a couple other teams, was like OP mainnet or extrapolate to whatever else is not just gonna be the roll up. It's like, no, like it's very clear that there's going to be a lot of these chains. And so then, you guys have spent time thinking about how to bring that all together, and then from a builder that, coming to build into one of these clusters is far more appealing than having to go and out and try it on your own or just launch your own chain somewhere in the abyss with no instant access to users, liquidity, network effects, etc. Um, and so I think that you guys did that well, but maybe too well. Like now OP mainnet is like less metrics than base, less users than base, etc. But maybe that was by design. So like what maybe this interrupt conversation, how does the interrupt conversation tie into like the super chain economics conversation? And like, you're building out a really, really great native interrupt for the super chain. Um, but it almost feels like you're shooting yourself in the foot with OP mainnet. And I know that's not how it actually is, but like how do you reconcile like native interop as a means to allow anybody to build chains within the super chain, be a part of the super chain economics, but maybe not necessarily there be like one best chain or two best chains or just kind of like yeah, like how have you thought about this evolution since like OP mainnet into kind of where we are now?
Yeah, I think the market is going to evolve a lot over the years.
Yeah.
Um, we launched OP Mainnet a while ago. It's kind of the original OP stack chain. And then Base launched. And then, Ink from Kraken launched. And, World Chain launched. And Sonium and Unichain, they're on the way. And basically, the idea is that we want to create an ecosystem that incentivizes positive sum games. So, like, the idea is that when there is one chain that is onboarding new users, We want to build a thing where everybody that is part of the super chain gets those new users. And, and that way, when any one chain is doing work to onboard, new people, then it rises the tides for everyone. And we believe that native interop is going to make this user experience very cohesive, and it's going to make it really feel like one chain. One of the North Stars of the super chain is to make it so that as a developer, your application scales automatically with each additional chain that is added to the super chain. This might sound a little crazy because, apps aren't necessarily designed in that way today. But we have a lot of conviction that we'll be able to figure out the design patterns that are required to enable this. And this will allow users to just like seamlessly migrate between chains in the superchain, and everyone kind of working together to improve the shared standard that is the OP stack and onboard and tap into a growing set of users.
Yeah, I think that vision is exactly what I share within the OP stack and then within the entire Ethereum scaling space. Like every one new like we should be thinking about this from the lens of like every one new user, even just extrapolate this out to crypto. That's why I kind of asked about the whole Solana, Celestia, Veil, other ones. Like every new user into any of these chains should be able to go to any of these other ecosystems and be a net win for them as well. We're so close, it feels like, but it somehow is still so far, in terms of, like, all the UX and the different execution environments and the bridging and the interop. A and yeah, I mean, sometimes I question if this whole, like, modular idea was the right path for Ethereum. I actually listened to, like, the Empire had a really good podcast with the Hack VC team about, you know, was Ethereum's modular bet right? And Hack VC was like, "Yes, it was," over a multitude of different metrics. Um but bringing it all together in that positive some way, I think it's easier for you guys to do within OP Stack, obviously, but it starts there, and then it starts from expanding that out into each of these clusters doing it, each of these kind of cohorts of chains, and then we kind of group up it and try to figure out how to make that a possibility for kind of everybody onboarding. And so yeah, I mean, I think we share that same vision, and we're definitely closer than ever. But like I said, still like it's out of arm's length in some way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree.
And it'll probably start within within cluster. That's most certainly easier for people to see. And then I think, it extends between clusters from there. And I'm curious to see like what, when you think about like user acquisition, yeah, making transactions on chain is one form of acquiring that user. I tend to think that assets are also kind of uh like a point of cluster, if you will, to I don't want to reuse that term incorrectly, but like a point where people can coalesce. And so I think one net new unit of liquidity ends up benefiting all. And even if it's just by virtue of like being, more liquid on chain versus off chain, or if it's more, you know, flows into a particular asset. And I bring, this part of the conversation up because I'd love to touch on OP the token if that's okay, and just talk through what the economics are as we build positive sum games in the super chain, and as there are network effects that compound between the rollups in the super chain. How does that lead to value accrual in the OP token?
Yeah, so the OP token is a governance token. It's meant to govern, the super chain. And the way that value flows through the super chain is all of the chains that are part of it pay a part of their revenue back to the collective. We call it like the Optimism Collective. It's kind of the maintainers of the super chain. Um, and the idea is to kind of collect that money, and it can almost be thought of like taxes to like a country. And as like a country, collects taxes, they can, redistribute that money back into the ecosystem. And um, we are interested in this idea of retroactive funding. It's an experimental capital allocation mechanism. And we don't think that it's the only capital allocation mechanism that's required for an ecosystem. But we think that it fills gaps that, other capital allocation mechanisms may not fill. So the idea is that value, um, accumulates back to the collective, and then the collective is able to, reallocate that value back into the ecosystem through retro funding or through grants. And in a way, it fits pretty well to the analogy of taxes in a country.
Yeah, and I think it's fitting you mentioned Balaji earlier in this pod because he's been one of the prominent people that have talked about network states. And I think if we were to look at what online communities have been able to formalize a network state, Ethereum certainly, but I think of the rollups that are out there, Optimism has done one of the best jobs at kind of articulating their network state in their community of people. So yeah, kudos to building a great network state that it's a pleasure to exist in.
Yeah, Mark, do you believe in that? Like, are you a big Balaji fan of network states? Like, this is way right field from this convo, but we're kind of wrapping up here, and so like, yeah, like, is network states, are these gonna happen? Like, are you a believer? Are you a part of any? Or like, what is this?
Yeah,
Yeah, like,
I'm a big believer in the idea of network states. Like some people don't like the term network state. I kind of interpret it in a more general way, like the less like specific definition that biology gives. Yeah, I'm a big believer in, people that have shared values on the internet, coming and living together and creating their own culture. And, you know, um, like, I think that is, like, a net good for the world. I've been, going to Zuzulu events for quite some time, and, yeah, I'm definitely a big believer. My goal is to grow retro funding to a point where it basically eclipses the crypto ecosystem and is able to fund actual physical things like roads, education systems, like gardens, um, like clean water, clean air. Like, I think all these things are primed to be funded retroactively, because there isn't like an immediate business model tied directly to them always.
What is the exit velocity from uh crypto on-chain rails? Because that part is very intuitive, I think. You retroactively fund some initiative on-chain, it benefits the chain, and it stimulates more activity on the chain, pays fees, et cetera, et cetera. You got a flywheel there. What is the escape hatch or the 0 to 1 to then incentivize some off-chain action? Clean water, I think, is a great example, right? What is the loop back to the collective to recoup that value and then continue spinning that flywheel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, if I had the exact answer, I'd just be doing it right now.
Yeah, you wouldn't be here today.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I think that there's going to be some point where we need to break out of these self-referential loops and really impact the real world. And I think maybe one opportunity is with natural disaster relief. You could imagine a very practical use of retro funding is somebody posts on Twitter that they did a ton of work during a natural disaster. And then all of a sudden, a community kind of comes together and retroactively funds this person. And then that right there just gets the idea out there that retro funding is possible. And really what we need is a one-click experience to create an end-to-end retro funding pipeline that's extremely simple that everyday people can understand.
Right now, it's just create meme coin, send some to Vitalik, hope it pumps, and then Vitalik donates it.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
The UX behind that isn't exactly perfect.
Mark, I got one last one for you. Putting you on the spot a bit here. What are some of your predictions for 2025? And if no predictions, then just, I mean, goals as well for yourself personally.
Yeah, great question. Oh, okay. So, I mean, okay, prediction number one, and this is definitely a goal. I mean, it's, shipping native interop to production in the OP stack, really making the super chain be a thing. Um, I think that, in 2025, we'll have it in production and people will, natively be able to send transactions between, tokens in the super chain. Um, you know, Other predictions, I think, Ethereum will ship Pectra. I think that will, go live. I think, um, yeah, I mean, I think I'll leave it at those two predictions.
Cool.
I have one more. I think
Yeah, go ahead.
the Optimism Collective will retroactively fund at least one good deed off chain. Maybe it already has.
That'd be cool. I mean, I'm down to do that right after this podcast wraps up.
Yeah, seriously. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining. It's been a pleasure to be a part of the super chain in the past and just learn. We've grown our own views about scaling Ethereum, about scaling the space over time as we've learned to become more technical and have some in agreement, some conflicting. Really appreciate your perspectives and your willingness to commit your life's work to scaling Ethereum and crypto. So, hope to have more fun technical conversations at conferences in the future.
Let's do it. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Cheers, man.
Same here. Thanks, Mark.